Hearing resumed. Next member to ask question, Mr. Lee Chuk-yen. Thank you, Chairman. Well, Chairman, just now you asked a question, and he said that he would revert later in relation to the integrated master plan. I hope that in his reply he would include this. Well, of course, if he could provide it, then all right. But according to what I gathered from the Highways Department, there is no such master plan. So perhaps they have this master plan, only that it wasn't given to the Highways Department. But first of all, I'd like to know whether the Highways Department or the Jacobs, did any of them ask them for a master plan? Perhaps they won't be able to answer this question. Perhaps they can supplement this information later. All right, Mr. Leung, can you supplement this information later? If it wasn't provided to the government, did they ask for it? Another question. In para 7 of your opening statement today, now it's become clear that there are a lot of challenges and there are significant complexities. So it's now understood that it is very difficult. According to his reply just now, according to a third-party assessment, it's doable but tight. So let's say if I were in the MTLCL to be responsible to my own organization, I should strive for a more relaxed program or more relaxed budget. However, it seems that the MTLCL just said yes to everything. So my question is this. Had it to do with the complacency of the former CEO of MTLCL, that he just said yes to everything? Or was it the case that you believed in your ability in overcoming any challenges despite the tight schedule? Or is it because the government urged the MTLCL to try to complete the project within this time frame, and that the government would undertake the responsibility in the event of delays? So had it to do with complacency, or was it because the government exerted pressure on the MTLCL? Has it to do with the window dressing attitude of the government? I want to know, in preparing or in signing the entrustment agreement, what was the situation? So what are you referring to? Are you referring to the completion date or the cost? Both. Because he replied just now that he made extra provisions for contingencies. But according to a third party's assessment, the time frame was tight. So as the entrusted party, of course, I would want things to be more relaxed unless he is very confident in himself. So both. In relation to cost estimate and the program, the MTLCL, was the MTLCL overconfident, or was it because of other reasons?
For that question, as we have mentioned, there was a significant amount of work done prior to entering into the second entrustment agreement, and there were a number of third parties involved. Those third parties also looked at, amongst other things, the timetable as well as the costs. At the end of the day, there was a conclusion at that time that the timetable was doable but tight. I would highlight for members a particular paragraph in the IEP report. This is government's IEP report. This is paragraph 254 on page 65. And to answer the honourable member's question, if the Chairman would indulge me, I would quote that paragraph. This is from the Pricewaterhouse factual annexure to the IEP report, which in paragraph 254 said, and I quote, we have not had sight of any evidence during the study that indicates government put pressure on MTRCL to tighten the delivery schedule prior to EA2, although we understand from MTRCL that government was keen to complete the Hong Kong section as early as possible. And discussions were held between Railway Development Office and MTRCL on this topic. The timetable, as highlighted, was at that time seen to be doable but tight.
係啦，即係咁變成係，如果係咁，即係話唔係政府壓力啦，咁係會。
So it's not pressure from the government. So had it to do with the overcomplacency of the project team? Because in para 6 and 7, you talked about the significant difficulty. So, were you negligent in passing this judgment? Instead of facing up to the difficulties, you were too complacent, such that you believe that you could complete the project. Doable but tight. Was it an overconfident assessment?
Government's own IEP report. In paragraph 255, they go on to say that, and this is factually, that MTR has sought assurance from our design consultants on the achievability of the timetable, the timelines in 2009 during both the preliminary design as well as the detailed design stages. It is understood from these studies that the consultants were asked by MTR to develop construction programs or contracts and advise on the construction methodologies. I would further respond to the member's question on the basis that the challenges that we have mentioned, a number of these challenges pertain across the industry. Some of these challenges were recognized at the beginning. The highlighted in both the IBC and the IEP report was comments back in 2009 of the potential of not being able to get sufficient labor. However, as we went through the construction piece, the extent of these challenges were much more than had originally been anticipated. An example of that is, as highlighted in the IBC report, when at the beginning back in 2009, using government indices looking at construction costs, there was an assumption that labor costs will only be increasing at around 2 or 3%, construction costs at 2 or 3% per annum. In fact, over that same period of time, construction costs were increasing significantly more than that, and in some cases, double-digit per annum. So the issues, some of the challenges were recognized at the beginning. However, the extent and magnitude of those challenges continued to develop over the course of the project and were an industry-wide situation.
Mr. Leung, I'd like to follow up on this. This is a mega project of this magnitude and complexity. If, according to your initial assessment, the time frame was already tight, and of course there are unexpected circumstances in the project, and for a project of this magnitude, if you already assessed it to be doable but tight, was it an over-optimistic assessment?
The consultants that were working on this project, the contractors that were tendering the various contracts, were also at that time of the view that the timetable of the program was achievable. I would, however, highlight that obviously this is now with the benefit of hindsight. The IBC report, IBC report noted that and I quote, "The negative impact of the unforeseen events on the schedule was not so much caused by any flaw in engineering or project management as by a lack of adequate schedule contingency." This is actually one of the conclusions from the IBC report.
But
according to what you said, the last sentence, that means according to the IBC report, I thought I missed the last bit. Lack of schedule what?
Adequate schedule contingency was their comment.
So the problem didn't happen initially, but it happened midway. Your capability to deal with contingencies or to provide buffer in the time frame, insufficient buffer. So, of course, if you already said at the outset that it was tight, then there wouldn't be sufficient for provisions for contingencies. So, in hindsight, would you agree that you won't be able to cope with such a tight time frame, given the magnitude of this project, and it was impossible for you not to give extra provisions for contingencies? So my question is this: why didn't you strive for more resources for provisions for contingencies in the schedule? Why didn't you request with the government at the outset for a more relaxed time frame? So why didn't you ask for something more than a doable but tight time frame?
If one looks back at the previous successes of the MTR projects, MTR has, over the last 30-odd years, successfully delivered our projects on time and on budget, using the systems and processes which we use also for the Express Rail Link with certain adjustments. It is based on the previous successes that I believe led the team and all of us to believe that, despite the fact that the schedule was doable but tight, that it was doable.
So you were blinded by your past glories. That's the conclusion. Thank you, Chairman. Next, Mr. Tan Ka-pil. Thank you, Chairman. Well, I attended a number of meetings this morning. I don't know whether I'm repeating other members' questions. From various reports, problems are highlighted. For example, Mr. Yao, Undersecretary for Transport and Housing, mentioned in the hearing on the 8th of April 2015 that in relation to the actual progress of works, the senior management of MTRCL did not have a good grasp of the progress. In the submission or the report to the government's highways department by the senior management, because of the inadequate knowledge of the progress, insufficient information was provided. And according to another report prepared by the independent committee, that was also the same conclusion. And Mr. Chiu, the former project director, also made the same remark. So my question for Mr. Leung is this: which position in the MTL management structure would be in the best position to know about the progress of works in the project? Before any difference before and after this disclosure, and also I quote from Undersecretary Mr. Yao that the MTLCL has kept the government in the dark. And what is your view on that?
Once again, there's always been full disclosure of information to government and the various departments of government. And at no time was there ever any intent, nor would there ever be any intent to withhold any information. I think the comment from Mr. Yao, Yao Sing-mo, when he appeared in front of the Select Committee, also refers to the IBC report and that same question, which was answered by or asked to Mr. K.K. Lau and Mr. Henry Chang. This was in November 2013, when the project was obviously still ongoing, and this was during a period when MTR was seeking from the contractor of a very important contract, 810A, the schedule to complete under this minimum operating requirement approach. And until MTR had that information, it is very difficult to confirm or come up with final comments on the schedule. So at that time in November 2013, which I believe is what Mr. Yao Sing-mo was referring to, MTR and our projects team was still awaiting the response from the contractor of 810A on the program. With regards to the Honourable Member's second question, as members are aware, and highlighted in our various reports, we have a clear process and system in place in terms of in project management of the Express Rail Link, with regular reporting to government as well as other entities. Of course, with the benefit of hindsight, and with the IBC report have come up with some recommendations in terms of enhancement to our system, and we've implemented those recommendations. As I mentioned before, those recommendations include the establishment of a Capital Works Committee that is now well established and operating, as well as enhancement to the reporting structure, which would include the use of so-called traffic lights as well as milestones. So these enhancements have already been implemented. Thank you, Chairman.
My question was this: at least a line should be drawn. That is, at least the Board of Directors should have a review committee to implement recommendations. I'll draw a line here. And before conducting this review, who in the MTRCL would be in the best position to know about the progress? Or was it Mr. T.C. Chow, or did he not know at all? Or was he in the best position to know? And after the review, which colleague should be the most familiar with the progress?
In our responses to the Select Committee, the way MTR operates, like many companies, the board is overall responsible for the activities of MTR, but delegates the management of day-to-day business to the executive. The executive, furthermore, has particular directors that look at particular aspects of the business. One of those aspects, of course, is importantly, the project aspects of the business. Within the project team, there are many colleagues. There are 3,000 colleagues in the project team, and the structure and reporting of that project team, I understand, have been in the various reports and have been reported to the Select Committee. The project director ultimately is responsible to the executive and to the board, and through that to the board, looking at the progress of all the projects that MTR is undertaking. As I mentioned, now with the enhanced structure we have, in addition, the board has set up the Capital Works Committee that would also have reports from the projects director and the projects division.
Before the enhancement of the structure, did this problem exist? That is, the person in charge of the XR project, he kept all the information to himself, so even you and the board were not informed. Was that the case?
The way the governance of the company operates, the individual directors are responsible for their particular areas, and the individual directors report on a regular basis to the executive of MTR, and the executive in turn report to the board. That is the method of reporting. I would highlight, and this is highlighted in the IBC report, that perhaps because of the over-optimism of the project director and the project team, it was not until April of 2014 that the delay of the Express Rail Link beyond 2015 was reported to the executive committee and to government.
It was only then that the board was made aware of it. Is that true? Yes.
Of 2014.
Mr. Tan Ka-pil, so that's your structure or chain of communication, and this is a mistake made in this chain. And that's another issue. There's someone responsible for communicating with the government departments. That's something we will look at particularly. Last week we invited Mr. Henry Chen, the Principal Government Engineer, Railway Development, to our hearing. If I may quote him, that is, he said so in his witness statement and in the course of the proceedings. He said that in some circumstances, Highways Department wasn't given timely information. In the first independent IBC report, it confirmed the fact that is some key information was withheld from the government, from the Highways Department in relation to the progress of the XL project. Mr. Leung, do you agree with Mr. Chen, and what would you consider to be key information?
The Honourable Member mentioned the comments from the IBC report, and the IBC report did note that in November there was certain voices from the project within the project team that was questioning the doability of the 2015 schedule. But as I mentioned before, at that time, this is in November 2013, at that time, we, MTR, and the projects team, as I understand it, were still getting from the contractor, from the 810A contractor, a program. Without that program, it is very difficult to assess the effectiveness of the overall program to complete the project. So at that time, and I think the comment from Mr. Henry Chang was relating to that particular period when the project team was still trying to get a final program from the 810A contractor.
Just the last point from me. Our perception, I don't know if other members agree, Mr. Henry Chen and what he described, that is, he wanted to get key information, say, about changes to the project. He felt often that the MTRCL wasn't able to provide all the information, and he questioned whether they could have done more. We're not talking about an isolated incident, but rather there was his general experience. That's what I gathered from him, anyway. So, this general situation, do you agree that's the case?
We have, as I've mentioned and as highlighted in the various reports, we have provided information as required by government. There was significant, very significant dialogue, interchange, discussions, meetings with government and members of government throughout the process. And as we've also mentioned, government have appointed their M&V consultant, Jacobs, to review and audit the work which MTR has done. So there was a significant exchange of information during all this period. As I commented earlier, the IBC report also noted that government and MTR were working in a collaborative and cooperative manner.
Well, if that's the case, Mr. Leung, because this select committee has heard this before. We've heard government officials emphasizing, well, perhaps not emphasizing, but rather mentioning a point. That is, the MTRCL did not provide all or adequate information for them to make an effective assessment. Now, you said you did not withhold anything, and there was smooth communication. So then you are saying that the government statement is dishonest then?
Other people's comments. But however, what I would like to do is, once again, quote from the IBC report. The IBC had reviewed and investigated this matter at length, including their independent experts. And if Chairman would indulge me just very quickly, the IBC in their report, and this is in paragraph 1.37 of the first IBC report, page 13, says delays against the project program have been reported on a timely basis and accurately to government in accordance with the terms of the entrustment agreement. In fact, further on page 83, paragraph 5.32 of the first IBC report, it sets out to say that the IBC does not find any attempt by the project team or the corporation to cover up or hide the delays being experienced in the various project contracts. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Tang, any more questions, please? No? Mr. Wu Jiwai? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, my questions may have been asked, but let me make an attempt here. In the IEP report, paragraph 6.11, now, as the administration wasn't able to receive report on the basis of the integrated master plan, so the government was kept in the dark. And then in paragraph 6.18 of the report, it also pointed out that there was unclear information, so the administration wrongly understood that the recovery delay measures were effective so that the project could be completed on time. Now, this was the IEP's assessment. Do you agree do you agree to this assessment, and what is the response to that assessment? Can you please first answer this question?
In terms of disclosure of information, I think we have discussed that already. There is a significant amount of discussions, disclosure, as well as meetings with government and government officials, as well as through the so-called M&V consultant, Jacobs, in their audit and review of the status of the project and the progress of the project. And once again, and as the Honourable Member had mentioned, in terms of the master program, our IBC experts and ourselves will say that there are master programs which are updated on a periodic basis using this P6 Primavera software that is a requirement under our project management processes.
主席，我問題係你同唔同意專家小組呢一個評？
Now, my question was whether you agree to the assessment of the IEP. You just have to say agree or not agree.
Significantly with the IEP and their experts. In general, we agree with the factual findings of the IEP, which are highlighted in the appendix to the IEP report. There are certain aspects of the recommendations and the comments from the IEP which we take a different view on.
Okay. 政府就有就住成
Now, the government has commissioned Jacob to be the M&V consultant to review your project or monitor project. They could ask for information from the MTRCL. Has the MTRCL provided all the requested information to Jacob? Did you do any selection or screening?
All the information, and this is to my knowledge, all the information that have been requested by government and their M&V consultant have been provided accordingly. That is my knowledge and understanding from reviewing all the various reports that have been made available to the public.
Okay. 咁即係話
In other words, say when we summons Jacob to the inquiry, we might get a different picture. Is that what you mean? Because it's just to your knowledge, right?
Honourable Member, as you're aware, I was not directly involved in the project teams at that time. So my knowledge is what is available, including the information available in the public domain, which would suggest that all information have been provided.
Mr. Wu, let's not speculate. Okay? Fine, Mr. Chairman. If I go back to another part, Mr. Leung was the CFO of MTRCL. In the statement, paragraph 6, that you said that the XR was the first railway project to be built on a service concession basis. Now, as the former CFO, now this is a new approach adopted for building the XR. Did you ever do any financial analysis and risk assessment? What information did you provide to the MTRCL as the CFO? Do you have an analysis report?
Chairman, there are clear processes in place at MTR to assess projects and to monitor projects as they develop. Not forgetting that under the entrustment agreement, we are to use our project management systems and processes, which include, amongst others, the PIMs, as well as our financial controls, our procurement processes. These processes have been reviewed and audited by a number of third parties, and those reviews and audits commend the effectiveness of that process. As I've said previously, at MTR, we use the same process and procedures for all our projects, be they service concession projects like this Express Rail Link, or be they ownership projects like the South Island Line East. We use the same process in all our assessment. That same process would be in accordance with our project management, our financial management, our procurement, etc.
Chairman, I want to ask directly the then CFO whether a risk assessment was conducted then and whether the report was submitted to the board. Mr. Leung.
Member for that question. Yes, there was, of course, a significant review of the entrustment agreement, and the board, as highlighted in the IEP report, also discussed the entrustment agreement. At that point in time, back in 2009, I and others are of the view that the entrustment agreement has a reasonable sharing of risk and reward between MTR as the project manager, as well as government as the owner of the project.
主席，我唔知可唔可以向呢個係即係前財務總監梁生呢係。
Well, I wonder, Chairman, if I may ask for this financial analysis report from the then CFO, Mr. Leung, because this would be an important piece of information for MTRCL's basis of considering that this is a tight but doable.
Tight in terms of timetable, that was based on a significant amount of work also done with and by third parties looking at the timetable, and it's based on that the conclusion or the recommendation of doable but tight arose. There was, as I mentioned, and this is highlighted in the IEP report, discussion at the MTR board on the entrustment agreement, which also looks at the risk of the entrustment agreement.
Sorry, I didn't catch it. You said doable but tight. You were referring to the timetable, but in terms of financial management and risk assessment, I want to know if it's related to the scope of our investigation. Well, Chairman, my view is this. In the entrustment agreement, we discussed doable but tight, this concept. And we also need to deal with the cost overrun issue. And one important clause in the entrustment agreement is that the government would bear the additional expenses. So I want to know whether, as the then CFO, what was his view on the assessment, on the risk assessment. And as a public listed company, what was the MTRCL's consideration in taking up the government's project? I want to know what you mean. Do you mean that it is included in the assessment?
There was a due process in place to review all our projects, including, importantly, the Express Rail Link. And as I mentioned, there were a number of discussions with government that ultimately resulted in the program to complete and the cost to complete, with both government and ourselves having appointed third parties to look at these matters. So the risk assessment of the overall project was an ongoing matter that over the course of the period prior to the signing of the entrustment agreement.
So Mr. Leung is unable to provide the information on risk assessment conducted then. Right, understood. So the former Director of Highways, Mr. Y, at the hearing on the 2nd of June pointed out that throughout the project there are 40-odd contracts. So apart from the completion dates, we should also look at the commencement date of the contracts. And without any buffer, if there was a delay in the previous contract's completion date, the commissioning date would be delayed. I want to know of the 40-odd contracts, how many contracts experienced delays in their commencement date, and whether there were appropriate adjustments to the commencement date and completion dates of other contracts. Would it become a significant cause of delay, and would it form a basis of claims?
Member for that question. As members are aware, the Express Rail Link is a highly complicated project with a number of the construction contracts that are interlinked. One contract could have an impact on another contract. The highlighted in the various reports is a comment that, in particular, one contract was tendered out late. This is contract 810A, or later than originally proposed or originally anticipated. Also highlighted in the IEP report and the IBC report, when the contract was tendered out, the contractors, in fact, there were a number of contractors tendering for that contract. The contractors were of the view that the timetable was doable, despite the fact that the completion date, as the Honourable Member said, the completion date was not shifted back. So there was a compression of timetable to achieve the same completion date. When those contracts were, or that particular contract was tendered out, the contractors were of the view that the shorter timetable was doable.
Chairman, I have two follow-up questions. Mr. Leung, I have a question. Perhaps when you answer questions, you should answer questions to your knowledge. You don't really need to quote from reports, because what we like to know is your answers, not answers from reports. Thank you. Well, yes, this is important, because I see that Mr. Leung is really quoting from reports. I don't know how much he really knows, or is he really a recording machine citing from reports. So, two follow-up questions. Mr. Leung, just now you mentioned that these contracts were interlinked. And according to the problems we see now, delays and cost overruns, or rather delays leading to cost overruns, I want to know whether this would form an important basis of claims by contractors. And also we asked the Highways Department this question to recover delays. Sometimes the MTRCR would revise the design. And according to the department, they only commented on the revisions. They weren't in a position to approve the revisions. So, Mr. Leung, in relation to the request for design revisions, you received comments from the department, but in your view, did it mean that the government already agreed to this? To these revisions? And what should be the normal approval procedures?
Question. We have at MTR a very clear and time-tried system in assessing claims, as well as discussions with contractors on claims. Because of the commercial sensitivity relating to claims, I'm at this time not able to comment more with regards to claims or individual claims. The Honourable Member also asked a question with regards to delay recovery measures, the so-called DRM. Once again, there's a clear process in place, and that's highlighted in the reports. The process ultimately would have those DRMs, the delay recovery measures, going for approval in what we call the Project Control Group, PCG. This PCG, Project Control Group, is an internal MTR group that assesses, amongst other things, changes as well, DRMs as well as claims. Government officials are invited and do sit as observers in the PCG when matters relating to the Express Rail Link and the Sha-Tin Central Link, the so-called entrustment projects, are being discussed. And government members are invited to comment on matters relating to those projects at the PCG.
我想澄清翻係咪即係話，如果 government officials
So to clarify, if government officials at the PCG did not object to DRM's delay recovery measures, does it mean that the government actually agreed to the arrangements?
The entrustment agreement, MTR has to use our processes as adjusted in terms of governance and communication with government. Very clearly, one of those processes, and also highlighted in the entrustment agreements, would be MTR's assessment of claims as well as matters like delay recovery measures. Government and government members have access to all the relevant PCG papers, the papers that discuss and talk about either the Express Rail Link or the Sha-Tin to Central Link. And at the PCG meetings, they are invited, relating to those matters, to give their views.
喺 PCG 嗰個
At the PCG meeting, the cost induced by DRM, was it known to the government?
PCG papers relating to the delay recovery measures, in addition to the discussion on the effectiveness of the measures and the technical aspects of the measures. These papers will include the financial impact of these delay recovery measures, as I understand it.
Chairman, I think a lot of DRMs are involved, but according to our investigation, it seems that the government wasn't aware of the costs entailed. But according to Mr. Leung, at every meeting, for every DRM, there would be cost implications. I want to know if Mr. Leung would be able to provide any proof at the PCG meetings. All the DLM related cost implications at the PCG meetings would be notified to the government. I want to know whether there is any proof. His evidence is proof. They should do that, Mr. Leung. That is, the DRMs implemented due to the delay and the additional expenditure. Was it reported to the government in relation to each DRM?
Financial aspects, timing aspects, and the criticality of the DRMs are all set out in the PCG papers, which are made available to government. These papers are then discussed at the particular PCG meetings on all aspects, on all those aspects. And, of course, government officials are invited to comment on these delay recovery measures.
主席，我想問下喺呢啲
Chairman, the DRMs involve cost implications. Do you have some sort of an alert system? Because the DRMs would utilize contingencies. So my question is, in the whole system, whether alerts would be issued so as to notify the government how much contingency has been used up by individual DRMs. Do you understand the question? Because the DRMs would utilize the contingencies or deplete the contingencies. Any regular reporting to the government?
In the papers, not just the technical aspects, of the express rail link being discussed, but the financial aspects. The financial aspects would look at the contingency remaining for the whole project. That is in the monthly reports, this 200-plus page report, which is given to government, I believe, in advance of their PSC meetings.
主席可唔可以請係梁生提供一份 typical 嘅係 PCG？
Can we submit? Can we ask for the papers and minutes of the meeting for reference? Mr. Leung, can you provide that?
To the Secretariat on that.
好，我有一個跟進嘅問題，就係喺呢個2010。
Yes, I have a follow-up question. In 2010, when the project commenced till 2014, in relation to the progress of works, were any letters issued to contractors, including warning letters, reminding them that they should complete their works in time?
I'm personally involved at that time, and so therefore the information that we have that is available would be the information from the various reports. I understand that the contractors and MTR have the same objective of completing the project as quickly as possible, and the contractors and MTR were always looking to come up with solutions, delay recovery measures to try to catch up with time.
其實我問題就好 specific 嘅。
Well, my question was specific. Starting from 2010, when the project commenced, till April 2014, did you ever issue any letters to contractors, including warning letters, in relation to the program?
Revert to the Secretariat.
你翻嚟覆返我好嘛？唔該。
Please let us know later. Another question about the Tai Kong Port. Well, I'm asking this question on behalf of the Deputy Chairman. For the Tai Kong Port to Chair Oak Chun tunneling works, for this contract, did you ask the contractor to do a proper job in the floodgate? If that's the case, did the contractor comply with the contractual requirements? And how did the MTRCL supervise this contract?
My project colleagues will be appearing before the Select Committee in about a month's time, and I would have, if Chairman would indulge me, I would have them respond to that particular question.
或者係佢哋
Before they come, could you please give us a written reply?
陳恒鑌
Mr. Chen Hanpen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the last inquiry, or in the last hearing, you said that the project's team was overly optimistic in recovering the delay. So, overly optimistic and professional assessment, how do the two differ? And apart from being overly optimistic, were there any other adequacies in taking forward this project on the part of the MTRCL?
Over-optimism, unfortunately, led to a late reporting of the delay. The optimism, over-optimism really is with hindsight. I think at any point in time, the project's team were working very professionally to try to catch up with schedules. This is a comment which to quote from the IEP report again, saying that the contract management was exemplary. The project team always, and even today, would do their utmost to catch up with schedule, to come up with solutions to catch up with the schedules. I think ultimately the success of some of those earlier solutions, the delay recovery measures, may, with hindsight, have led to the over-optimism of the team and the previous project's director. All throughout the process, the MTR projects team has remained, in my view, very professional. They have done whatever they can to catch up time. They have worked hard. They have done everything possible to reach the objective of delivering based on a schedule and in the most cost-effective manner.
Okay.
或者咁樣問啦。
Perhaps I could put it this way. When the RCL found out about the delay, did it ever try to exert pressure on the contractors, and how did you exert the pressure? Mr. Leung?
With contractors, the contractors and ourselves have the same objective. We work with the contractor, and of course, that working with the contractor at one point in time would be giving them pressure, other points in time collaborating. But it is working with the contractors to deliver the project based on a schedule and in the most cost-effective manner. It is working with the contractor on issues like delay recovery measures that had allowed the project earlier on to mitigate some of the delays which could have arisen because of the construction difficulties.
OK。另外，我想問下呢，就係
Now, I understand you are not technical personnel, but if I may find out, when did the MTRCL know about the ground condition? It was difficult to excavate further, and there was massive granite. When did you find out about it? When did you inform the government at once? When did you inform the government? Which ground condition? The West Kowloon terminus, the ground condition of the West Kowloon terminus.
And as the Honourable Member mentioned, I'm not the construction expert, but as I understand it from the various reports, the issue of ground conditions arose actually at quite an early stage in the construction process. And as based on all the reports available, the issues were reported in the various reports to government and made available to the M&V consultant.
好啦，咁既然你知道西九龍總站
Okay, fine. So you knew there was difficult ground condition for the WKT. You adopted delay recovery measures. Did you think the DRMs work?
The difficulties were, or the construction difficulties, the ground conditions were known with site investigation as well as after the construction commenced. However, the situation with, for instance, the site conditions, the ground conditions, was worse than one had anticipated during the site investigation. As the project team is a very professional project team. When they come up with these problems, they come up with solutions to address the problems. So highlighted in the response to the Select Committee in August of this year, there were a number of instances where on the West Kowloon terminus site, because of difficult ground conditions, there were delay recovery measures implemented. A number of those delay recovery measures were successful after implementation.
Mr. Chen, well, you said your team was professional. Mr. Henry Chen, Principal Government Engineer, Railway Development of the Highways Department, said in the inquiry in October on the 20th, he said that for 810A, 810B there was delay, so it led to late commencement of 810A. But when 810A contract was signed, the MTRCL did not appropriately lengthen the completion date for 810A. Why was that the case? Was it because you believed that if you did not push back the completion date for 810A, then with your very professional DRMs, you would be able to recover the progress? Or was it just an oversight on your part? Or was there any other reasons? Can you explain?
As mentioned, the 810A contract was tendered out later than originally anticipated, and part of that was due to the some delays in 810B contract. when 810A was tendered out, there were a number of tenderers. The tenderers are very well aware of the program to complete their particular, the 810A contract. And the tenderers were of the view that the program is achievable. So it is not just MTR's view, but the tenderers who are tendering for those contracts were tendering on the basis of that particular timetable.
So
you believed that they thought it was doable, or was it your professional assessment that if you awarded the contract this way, even though the previous contract was not completed, there was delay, it would lead to delay in this next contract, but still in your assessment, you did not need to push back the completion date of this contract because you believed in the contractor's timetable. Is that correct?
The 810A in this particular case contract can be achieved or can be completed in that shortened time frame, and the tenderers, not just the successful tenderer, but all the tenderers that were tendering for this particular contract were also of the view that the timetable, as I understand it, that the timetable was achievable.
Sorry, 唔好意思。
My apology. If I may ask, the tenderers, when they submitted their tenders, were they aware of the complex ground condition, or did they just base their tender on your site investigation report, so they did not know that there were some 85,000 square meters buried below ground? Could that be the case?
We are to use our processes, including our conditions of contract. Our conditions of contract would have certain risks being retained by the owner of the project and certain risks passed on to the contractor, in this case for 810A. The contractors, 810A, would be given the ground investigations and ground report from the investigations that have been done previously, and they would tender based on that ground investigation and that ground report.
ground report 係你哋公司做嘅係咪？
This is the site.
Did you do the ground investigation report?
If the ground conditions are shown to be worse than that base case report, which they tender on, then the risk rests with the owner of the project. This is the MTR standard contract terms.
主席，我想問多一條呢，就係
If I may ask another question, Mr. Chairman, the MTRCL firmly believed in your DRMs. Now, in your assessment, how many % of the DRMs were effective? Or was it the case that the DRMs would still lead to delay, or rather cause delay to the project? Now, your DRMs, you believed in them, was it based on your past track record or in your belief in your project's team?
Question. I do not have, and it is very difficult to assess the DRMs in that way. Whenever if a delaying issue or an issue arises, the project team in their professional manner would look at methodologies to overcome those issues. The important thing is to stop any further delay, for instance, in the program or further cost overruns. The important thing is to move a particular contract back into the original contract duration. And these DRMs, many of these DRMs were done for exactly that purpose. Some of these DRMs were quite significant. For instance, in 810A, there was the shifting of Jordan Road southwards as one of the temporary traffic measures before shifted northwards. That was one of the delay recovery measures because of the difficult ground conditions that led to the difficulties on the retaining wall that was being built in that area. There are many other examples of successful DRMs.
Well, despite that, the fact that you achieved success in some areas, you failed in some other areas, but you don't have the statistics. So, on what basis would you believe that the DRMs would not affect the progress or ultimately the completion date? Has it ever occurred to you that implementing DRMs would, in some way, affect the commissioning date or the completion date? Before 2014, did it ever occur to you that the possibility of delays? Please answer.
As highlighted in the reports, prior to April 2014, the executive of MTR, except the then projects director and the board of MTR, was not aware of the delay beyond 2015.
好，第二輪5分鐘連問連答。
Second round. 5 minutes questions and answers included. Dr. Lo Wai Kwok. Chairman, a question for Mr. Leung. At the hearing on the 15th of July, Mr. Leung previously said that the estimated commissioning date was the 4th of August 2015, but he emphasized that it was just an estimate. And in para 32 of his statement, and let me read out the statement. The second entrustment agreement does not impose an absolute obligation to complete the project by the 4th of August 2015. And rather, under the second entrustment agreement, the corporation is to use best endeavors to complete or procure the completion of the project to minimize the effect of any delay. The entrustment program is subject to modification as a result of change, including, as a matter of right, due to contractor delays that result in extensions of time for the contractors to deliver their obligations. My question for Mr. Leung is this. Is this the corporation's understanding only, or is it a mutual understanding between the MTRCL and the government? That is to say, both parties are of the view that the commissioning date was just an estimate. What about responsibilities or obligations? Did you have an understanding with the government that this is just an estimate?
P report also sets out very clearly the responsibility of the various parties, including MTR and government under the entrustment agreement. And it also sets out, with regards to the timetable and the cost to complete, the methodologies and the mechanisms under which these timetable and the cost to complete can be adjusted. And therefore, the August 2015 original program to complete is, as highlighted in the various reports, an estimate that can be subject to change. This is well highlighted in government's own IEP report, Chairman.
Chairman, I don't have further questions. Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Thank you, Chairman. 2 questions. Well, in Mr. Leung's reply today, he said very clearly that labor shortage had a significant impact on the 5 railway projects, including the XRL project. However, what we see is something different, because for the 5 railway projects, for the XRL project in particular, there have been serious delays and cost overruns, whereas for other railway projects, the delays or cost overruns are not as significant. So, in the face of labor shortage, I'd like to know what methodology was adopted in the XRL project or in other railway projects, so that for other railway projects they could be completed in time or within budget. And last time I asked another question, Mr. Leung has emphasized all along that in previous meetings, be it the government or the executive committee, they were they knew the additional expenditure involved and the delays. But in 2014, before the MTRCL announced the cost overrun issues, they were of the view that the funds, or the cost estimate, should be sufficient. I am going to ask about this drastic change. Why is it that after April 2014, all of a sudden, the cost estimate was no longer sufficient to cope with the changes? Or were there signs, or did it just happen all of a sudden? And did the government know about the signs? Mr. Leung.
Firstly, I would highlight that, in fact, unfortunately, all our existing rail projects are and have suffered some degree of delay, and some of those, apart from the Express Rail Link, and some of those have been not insignificant. As members are aware, the Kwun Line extension and the South Island Line East, which are currently projects ongoing, have also suffered delays and have also suffered from some of the common issues and common problems across the industry, which includes the shortage of labor. We have disclosed and announced the latest estimate of the cost to complete and the program to complete for those other ownership projects. And I think members would find that in terms of the cost to complete, there has also been, unfortunately, some increases in costs, which of a magnitude that may not be dissimilar to the increases that we're talking about for the Express Rail Link. So there have been some costs and program implications because of the common issues that pertain to the construction industry here in Hong Kong. I would secondly add that the Express Rail Link itself is, as members are aware, a very complicated project. It is the first all-underground high-speed rail project in the world, I believe. And the West Kowloon terminus, it spans on a floor plate of 11 hectares with, I believe, a construction floor area of 380,000 square meters. It is a very, very large project, which adds to the complexity. The member's second question with regards to the increase in cost situation for the Express Rail Link, as highlighted in the various reports and confirmed in all our reporting, up until March of 2014, the Express Rail Link budget was still showing a contingency amount. In fact, up until March of 2014, the amount of contingency shown was around 3.75 billion Hong Kong dollars. That was on the basis of the project being able to meet its original timetable. In April of 2014, a month after that, as members are aware, the executive of MTR, apart from the projects director and the board of MTR, became aware of was made aware of the delay in the schedule. As a result of that, our teams were asked to do an assessment of the cost to complete. A delay is going to increase costs. So therefore, up until March of 2014, the budget was still showing a contingency based on the old timetable to complete of August 2015. With the delay, that delay would increase costs, and therefore it is because of that delay which has increased the cost of the Express Rail Link beyond the original budget.
So,
one final question. Let me ask Mr. Leung. Now, usually my understanding is that there should be a deadline for construction projects. Beyond that, there would be penalties. And according to Mr. Leung's evidence, the deadline was August 2015, and that it was just an estimate. And according to the mechanism, it could be subject to change. So do I understand correctly that you only have an estimate of the completion date but not really a deadline? The project will be completed as when it is completed.
Agreement, which is well highlighted in the IEP report, it does note that the program to complete is an estimate that is subject and that can be changed under certain circumstances.
Right, I know that, but my question is to you, is directed to you, not the panel. And my question is this: do I understand correctly that in fact there is no really a deadline for this project? It will be completed when it is completed, because this is just an estimate.
Endeavors to complete the project as quickly as possible under the entrustment agreements. But the entrustment agreement itself has the program to complete as an estimate that is and can be subject to change.
Yes, you used your best endeavors to complete the project, but as to when the project is completed, the project will be completed when it is completed. There is no deadline. It can go go all the way to 2020 or 2028.
The program in the entrustment agreement is an estimate, and that estimate is subject to adjustments under certain circumstances. We, as the project manager, always use our best endeavors to complete the project in as short a time as possible.
But no deadline. Do you mean that? Do I understand correctly?
The estimated program under the entrustment agreement is subject to adjustments in accordance with the entrustment agreement, Chairman.
So my question is that there is no deadline under the entrustment agreement.
Chairman, the entrustment agreement requires MTR to use its best endeavors to in our project management, and the.
Well, Mr. Leung, the question is this: whether or not there is a deadline, you should use your best endeavors. But the question is, and it is very simple, very specific. My question is, there is no deadline under the entrustment agreement.
The report, it very clearly sets out that there are mechanisms to amend the entrustment program, and those mechanisms are very clear, Chairman.
Okay.
If there are no other questions, the meeting is adjourned. Mr. Leung, thank you for attending. If necessary, you'll be summoned again, but I don't think it's necessary. You are now excused. Thank you for attending again. Thank you, Chairman.